The Upper House game is one of the most famous games of chess ever played, and it makes a lot of sense why. It's a very short game, but it's filled with a lot of important ideas and strategies. And we cannot forget, the story behind it is quite interesting. So the main character of our story is named Paul Morphy. Paul Morphy has just gotten his doctorate in law, but he got it so early, he's too young to study it. So, Paul Morphy decides to just go around the US and destroy all the famous chess players of the time. Eventually, though, when he turns 21, he decides to go to Europe and destroy all the famous chess players there. Paul Morphy then got incredibly famous off of beating a bunch of famous chess players and became known as the World Chess Champion. Slight problem to that, it wasn't an official name, more of a nickname. It mainly had the problem that there wasn't an actual World Chess Championship during that time, so there wasn't an official World Chess Champion, but he still had the nickname nonetheless, and it was still quite the impressive feat. So one day, Paul Morphy was in Paris, and two men approached him. Their names were Duke Karl and Count Eisenward. They asked Morphy if they wanted to go to an Italian opera called Norma. Paul Morphy gladly accepts their offer, but there's a bit of a catch, if you will. Somehow, during the opera, a chess game broke out, and this is where our facts start to turn more into legends. Now, the legend goes that his back was facing against the opera the entire chess game, but this is where many people start to argue about different ideas. Some people believe that Paul Morphy actually thought the chess game was more important than the opera, and he even insisted on putting more focus into the chess game, while other people believe that he wasn't really wanting to play chess at the time because, he was at an opera, and the only reason why he accepted the chess game was because Count Eisenward and Duke Karl were just kind of bothering him until eventually he gave in. Now, I personally believe he was more into the chess game solely on the fact that I feel like that is something I would probably do, and I can't tell if I'm supposed to be proud about that. Some sources even say that Duke Karl and Count Eisenward were speaking three different languages just to try and throw Paul Morphy off. But enough about the backstory. Let me show you why this is such a good chess game. Paul Morphy has the white pieces. Count Eisenward and Duke Karl have the black pieces. White starts off with e4, e5, knight f3, and d6. This is known as the Philidorus defense. Quite passive opening, but very solid nonetheless. It's not really as modern. Back in the day, the year was around 1858, if I'm correct. Now, you'll normally see something like knight c6, or maybe even knight d6, but this was a very popular opening back in the time. Now, this does have some downsides. Black's dark squared bishop is now blocked, and there's no development of a piece, meaning that white will develop faster if they choose so. d4, attacking the e5 pawn, and bishop g4. Now, the problem with bishop g4 is that, while at first this actually used to be mainline theory, it isn't considered a good move by today's standards. Now, the problem with this is white then forces black to make a lot of moves, mainly when d takes e5 is played. And the problem is you can't play d takes e5, then you have queen takes d8 check, and king takes d8. And the problem with this is black can no longer castle, and white is just completely winning. So, black has to play bishop takes f3. Now then, queen takes f3, d takes e5. Now, Paul Morphy starts to play very aggressively. Black plays a random move, white will lose on the spot. So, black has to protect his king, and they play knight f6. Now, knight f6 is a very nice move, but many people would prefer something like d7, developing the queen instead. Now, I would personally prefer queen f6 because it offers a queen trade, protects this pawn, protects mate, and does a lot of other nice things. But knight f6 is definitely a playable move, by all means. And then we have this really nice move, queen b3. And the point of it is it's a fork. The bishop can take the f7 pawn, say random move. Bishop takes f7 check. And there's also queen takes b7. No matter what you do, you're going to probably lose a pawn. This is not good for black. So they have to play queen e7, defending this pawn. Mainly because if we go a move back, what is the weakest square on the board? At the moment, it's f7. Mainly because we have a bishop and a queen laser beaming it like this. Not good. This is very bad. And so queen e6 blocks that from the bishop taking, but it still hangs b7. Also, to add to that, now the bishop is trapped, the bishop on f8, and that's going to make it really hard to develop. This also creates a domino effect because now black can't castle, which is not nice, and so this isn't looking good for black. So, queen takes b7, right? Well, actually not. This is where the most controversial move in the entire game is played. Paul Morphy plays knight c3, and the idea here is that queen takes b7 is winning a pawn, but the game's going to last a lot longer. What I mean by that is by queen d4 check, there's only one move that doesn't lose your queen. Let's say, like, white plays bishop d2. Queen takes b7, and you've just hung your queen. So, the only playable move here is queen b4. Queen takes b4, sorry. And then you have bishop takes b4 check, and then you can probably, like, develop a knight. And white is up a pawn, but at the same time, they've lost their main attacking piece, which means the game is going to last a lot longer. So, instead of that, knight c3. And the idea here is you're blocking that check, and you're adding another piece to white's attack. Now c6 is played. If I'm correct, this is actually top engine move, and mainly just because it defends this pawn, and it just kind of doesn't hang everything. So that's, pretty nice. And then bishop g5, pinning the knight to the queen. If you move your knight, I will now take your queen. So black is probably not going to move this knight. And so after this pin, though, black is sinking. They're discussing in their 3 different languages, maybe, we don't know. And this f7 pawn is still really weak. So, what's making it so weak? Well, it's the queen and the bishop. So how do we get those guys to no longer be attacking that very weak pawn? Well, it's by attacking the bishop, forcing it to move. Except for, this is a bit too aggressive. Mainly because white has the beautiful move, knight takes b5. But wait a second, what about c takes b5? Well, then you have bishop takes b5 check, knight d7, blocking the check, and then queenside castles. And what makes this sacrifice so interesting is if we go back, right at b5, look at how many attacking pieces white has. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 2 bishops, a queen, and a knight. Now by... Whoops, that's not the right move. Now by taking here, after the series of these moves, how many pieces does white have attacking? Well, we have 2 bishops, a queen, and a rook. We have 4 pieces. Meanwhile, let's look at black. So here, what do they have defending? Well, it's not looking good for them. They have a knight, but that doesn't really count. It's pinned, so... I mean, this knight's not going anywhere. This bishop's not going anywhere, so you really only have the queen. So after the sacrifice, it may seem like black has now developed a piece, but at the same time, this knight is also pinned. So there's not really a good use for that knight, or this knight. They're just kind of stuck there. And so, once again, you only have this queen. So after moving the knight, queenside castles, white still has 4 attacking pieces. rook d8, and the thing about this move is it's incredibly passive. At this point, black is just trying to survive more than actually go on the aggressive. And you can literally see black has just made this little safety square. There's nothing really here that's just trying to survive. So now white's thinking, well, what to play now? I mean, you could take this knight, but, you know, taking it, it relieves all the pressure. It's not really good. You know, maybe like rook d2, landing to double the rooks, but that could work. But it's not aggressive enough. You know, taking that knight, but is very forcing. But Polmorphy finds a very interesting move. Another sacrifice. Rook takes d7. And the idea here is that while this is a sacrifice, black doesn't really have that many good moves. I mean, you can't take with a queen, because that just hangs a queen. You can't take with a knight, that hangs a queen. You can't take with the king, that's illegal. So the only real move you can play here is rook takes d7. And now look, now your rook's pinned. Then we have rook d1, and let's look at this again. Before this, before the sacrifice, how many attacking pieces does white have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 pieces. We have 2 bishops, a queen, and a rook. Now, going forward, how many pieces do we have now? Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 2 bishops, a queen, and a rook. And despite all the sacrifices so far, we've still had the exact same number as attacking pieces. Meanwhile, if we look at black, let's go a couple moves before, we have the rook and the queen. This knight is pinned, so there's nothing you can really do about that. This knight's pinned, you can't really move any of those, so they're not really defending much. This rook's kind of just sitting there, there's nowhere to go. So you really only have these 2 pieces. After white sacrifices, you only have 1. Because now this rook is pinned. This rook isn't going to go anywhere. And so, really, you only have this queen, once again, and now black has lost a defending piece. So it's black's move now, and they play queen e6. And the idea here is, you know, maybe it's not looking too bad for black. Like, they're losing by a lot, actually. It's not good. But, you know, now that bishop can get developed, not to that square, that hangs a piece. Maybe you can develop the bishop and on castling. And you're offering a queen trade. Maybe white will trade its most powerful piece in its attack right now. Except for now, it's time for white to take that bishop. Now, the thing is, once bishop takes the rook, this is very bad, mainly because you have no good piece to take it with. Wait a second, what if we take with the knight? Like, the queen's no longer pinned, so we can just take with the knight, right? Except for this is a trap. You see, after a beautiful move, queen b8 check, white takes the completely hanging queen right now. Rook d8 mate. And just like that, Polmorphy can go back to watching the opera game his 2 good friends have paid for.